First of all, I wish to state categorically that I am not in support of the ban of Watchtower members in Russia. For the Russian state to take a totally unnecessary and extreme decision accusing witnesses of extremism reminds me of the title of a movie. We are indeed living in a mad, 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 mad world. And the response of the Watchtower organization helps to prove the point. Prior to the ban,
No doubt you have heard that the peaceful worship of Jehovah's Witnesses is under attack in Russia. Just 1 week ago, on March 15, the Russian Ministry of Justice filed a claim with the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation seeking to declare our religious organization as extremist or criminal in nature and ban our activity. The Supreme Court is scheduled to consider the claim on Wednesday, April 5. Even though their decision is pending, already the Ministry of Justice has issued a suspension notice with the aim of shutting down many of our branch activities.
That defies a basic principle of justice. For the court to begin restrictions on the activities of the organization before the case is heard is acting on the presumption of guilt. In a normal world, the presumption of innocence is what obtains in the courts. I have made this point to emphasize that there are so many things wrong with what the Russian court has done from the onset. It is bizarre. It deserves to be condemned, and I condemn it. But that is another issue being tried in the court of public opinion.
Sadly, Russia's federal law on extremist activity is being misapplied to Jehovah's Witnesses. Around the world, we are politically neutral. We are known as peace-loving citizens who abhor violence and warfare. Under no circumstances would we ever resort to any extremist or criminal activity.
One of the reasons it is so hard to help witnesses to see the deception they are under is that from the get-go, they are into defensive mode and are often defending what you are not even arguing. Sadly, I do not believe Mark Sanderson is merely in defensive mode, but in deceptive mode. Pay attention, people. Let us not get emotional about this. This is a legal matter. Let us consider, therefore, the legal arguments.
Sadly, Russia's federal law on extremist activity is being misapplied to Jehovah's Witnesses. Around the world, we are politically neutral.
Are witnesses in Russia being accused of taking political sides? No.
We are known as peace-loving citizens who abhor violence and warfare.
Are Watchtower members in Russia being accused of violent activities and warfare? No.
Under no circumstances would we ever resort to any extremist or criminal activity.
Oh, but you are. You are guilty as charged. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel was guilty of criminal activity when he was thrown in the den of lions.
So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing.
A crime is the violation of criminal law in a given state. That is my layman's definition. It is defined at dictionary.com as an action or an instance of negligence that is deemed injurious to the public welfare or morals or to the interests of the state, and that is legally prohibited. We can argue that the law was crazy, ridiculous, nonsensical, unfair, which happens to be my opinion on the law passed in Russia. What we think of the law is another issue. What the law states is what the courts are asked to adjudicate on. And if what Sanderson said is the kind of pathetic argument that his legal team took to the courts, no wonder they lost. They were found guilty. From the New York Times, April 20, 2017.
The denomination suffered relentless persecution by the KGB during the Soviet era, and after more than a decade of relative peace following the collapse of communism in 1991, it again became a target for official harassment under a 2002 anti-extremism law. That law makes it illegal for any group, other than the Orthodox Church and other traditional religious institutions, to proclaim itself as offering a true path to religious or political salvation.
Is the Watchtower a traditional religious organization? No. So by Russian law, crazy or not, they do not qualify to proclaim salvation. The absurdity of the law aside, is it guilty of proclaiming itself as offering a true path to salvation?
Only Jehovah's Witnesses, those of the anointed remnant and the great crowd, as a united organization under the protection of the supreme organizer, have any scriptural hope of surviving the impending end of this doomed system, dominated by Satan the devil. And while now the witness yet includes the invitation to come to Jehovah's organization for salvation, the time no doubt will come when the message takes on a harder tone, like a great war cry.
Not just a true path, but the only path. And that is extreme. I cannot say it too often. I cannot say it too much. The law is crazy. But that is the law. And the Watchtower is guilty as charged under Russian law. From the Guardian newspaper.
Russian authorities have put several of the group's publications on a list of banned extremist literature, and prosecutors have long cast it as an organization that destroys families, fosters hatred and threatens lives, a description the organization says is false.
Does the Watchtower organization destroy families?
The Jehovah's Witnesses claim to bring the families together. Through them, my brother killed himself. My mother tried to kill herself. My two sisters and my brother will not speak to me. My grandmother will not speak to me. She wouldn't let me see my grandfather before he passed away. They didn't bring our family close together. They nearly totally destroyed it.
There is no honorable way out of this religion.
Because of the way that they had treated my family, I disassociated myself from the Watchtower Society, never dreaming that my children would refuse to have anything to do with me. In fact, I have a little 2-year-old grandson that I've never even seen.
My 2 children and my 5 grandchildren are forbidden to see me, their grandmother, because of the Watchtower. What kind of organization, going under the heading of Christian, would disallow the children and grandchildren to see their mother and grandmother?
That was from Jeremiah Films. This is from JW Broadcasting, demonstrating how they break up families.
I tried to contact them. I just wanted to talk and to hear their voice. I missed being with my family. And they thought about reaching out to me. But they knew that if they had associated with me, even a little, just to check on me, that small dose of association might have satisfied me.
Brian Garcia is a former Watchtower member, now a Christian pastor. He put out a video in response to the Russia ban on witnesses, rejecting the move as I have. In that video, said he,
"Now on the flip side, here I am a Christian 10 years later, and I've got family members who still don't talk to me, who still do not associate with me because of my convictions as a Christian. How do I feel about that? Well, I'm not particularly happy that I have family issues."
So the Watchtower is indeed guilty of destroying families, guilty as charged. Does the society foster hatred? What verdict would be called if, in the many Watchtower publications shown to the court, the following statement was considered?
When they deliberately choose such badness, after knowing what is right, when the bad becomes so ingrained that it is an inseparable part of their makeup, then a Christian must hate, in the biblical sense of the word, those who have inseparably attached themselves to the badness. True Christians share Jehovah's feelings toward such apostates. They are not curious about apostate ideas. On the contrary, they feel a loathing toward those who have made themselves God's enemies.
Guilty as charged. Does the Watchtower organization threaten lives? Here's another quote from the Guardian article.
Borisova also said Jehovah's Witnesses' opposition to blood transfusions violates Russian healthcare laws.
The blood issue in the back of our minds was bothering us because as Jehovah's Witnesses, if we freely gave a blood transfusion to our daughter, we'd be excommunicated, we'd be disfellowshipped. Well, the doctors finally came to our room and it was just like an ultimatum. They said, "Listen, we know from our records that you're a Jehovah's Witness. We know that you don't take blood transfusions." And the doctor looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mr. and Mrs. Blizzard, you have to make a decision, yes or no, whether your child lives or dies." I remember going over to the bed and she had these cords and wires keeping her alive, life support systems, and holding this limp child that was our only daughter, and just going over to the window and looking out and watching the clouds and the sky and just started to weep. And I said, "Oh God, Jehovah," and I prayed to Jehovah.
We just had a real distinct impression that we were supposed to obey God's law and go by what we had always been taught, and that we were to let our daughter die.
As much as I am not in support of the extreme position taken by Russia, it is a sad day when a country has a greater appreciation for the sanctity of family and the health of its constituents than does an organization posing as a religious organization. Sad. It is the official policy of the organization, in discussing the subject of lying, to withhold truthful information from persons they deem not entitled to it. Are Watchtower members entitled to know the truth about why they are banned in Russia? I cannot claim to have seen every response the organization has put out, but in not one of the articles or videos I have seen have they mentioned the reasons stated in the New York Times and in the Guardian, information I have heard from other sources. But a Watchtower member told me the Russian government has declared them extreme without stating how or why they are extreme. How interesting that a former Watchtower member told me of the shunning and the blood transfusion considerations that led to the ban. How typical is it that Watchtower members are the ones in the dark? Is that by chance or by design? Not only is their response a practice in cover-up, it also opens up a can of worms in terms of their theology and also in their twisted way of thinking. In his video, Brian Garcia also said,
Even though as a Jehovah's Witness, I know that when I was a Jehovah's Witness, I was taught that it would be Christendom's churches that would be attacked first, and then Jehovah's people would be attacked. And so this is a reversal in reality. And so this wouldn't be consistent with their doctrine. But of course, they're going to jump on this and they're going to say, you see, I told you we're the true religion.
Oops. So it is not Christendom that is being attacked first. It's the witnesses. What does that say of their doctrine? Try the word false. The typical member will not see this. They will just jump over it to say this demonstrates they are the true church. True church. They evade the false doctrine to zoom in on their claim of being true. How ironic. But not all witnesses are typical. There are those who actually pay attention but love to argue tooth and nails for the organization they revere.
In the larger fulfillment, the standing will occur when the United Nations, the modern-day disgusting thing, attacks Christendom, which is holy in the eyes of nominal Christians, and the rest of Babylon the Great.
The ones who love to argue will say that they did not teach that Russia will attack Christendom first, but that the United Nations, the disgusting thing, will be the entity to do it. Really? From the Human Rights Without Frontiers International website.
The official decision on this matter is expected to be released any day. This threat of a complete ban has received widespread condemnation across the globe, including from the European Union representation to the OSCE, the European Union delegation to the Council of Europe, the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, and the UN Special Rapporteurs on freedom of religion or belief, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of opinion and expression.
So, instead of the UN attacking Christendom first, we see their spokesmen speaking out against witnesses being attacked first. This brings me to an interesting revelation at jw.org, posted on April 3. On video, experts react to threat of ban on Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia. Who was the first person featured?
During my time, the various years that I served as UN Special Rapporteur for freedom of religion and belief, I've always been in touch with Jehovah's Witnesses, including when undertaking country-specific fact-finding missions, because Jehovah's Witnesses are one of the communities very much under threat, but with little public attention giving to their situation. So it's all the more important that we become aware of the dramas unfolding there.
So they do not speak with their former members, who they call apostates, but they proudly post on their website that while this gentleman was with Satan's agent, the modern-day disgusting thing, he was in constant touch with members. Should Jehovah's organization, as they claim to be, have anything to do with the modern-day disgusting thing? The can of worms is just being opened.
Our Lord Jesus Christ warned that true Christians would be hated and would face opposition and outright persecution. Do you recall what Jesus said at John 15, verses 18 to 20? If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were part of the world would be fond of what is its own. Now, because you are no part of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, for this reason the world hates you.
Every time their questionable teachings come into question, they take the same pathetic line: the world hates us. I have been accused of hating witnesses when, out of love for them, I have created a ministry to help them. On the one hand, the Watchtower is claiming, as a direct response to the Russia ban, that the world hates them. On the other hand, the confused organization said,
On April 20th, 2017, despite global denunciation, Russia's Supreme Court ruled to criminalize the activity of Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia.
So the world hates you, yet there is global denunciation against what Russia has done to you? The world hates you, yet you proudly list on your website a whole bunch of people from Satan's system of things who are coming to your defense? And how can you keep claiming to be not part of the world when you privately sought association with the United Nations of all things, the modern-day disgusting thing spoken of by the prophet Daniel according to your theology, and you only pulled your association when you're exposed? How can you claim not to be a part of the world when you have shares in several worldly corporations, including companies producing weapons of war and tobacco, not to mention Cinemax, producer of adult entertainment or softcore pornography? Do the words of Jesus, being so quickly quoted by Mark Sanderson, apply to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society? Really?
The Apostle Paul was no stranger to persecution and the associated suffering. At 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 11, he said, "I endured these persecutions, and the Lord rescued me from them all."
Please do not put yourself in the category of Paul. Paul, who declared Jesus the mediator between God and man, was persecuted for preaching Jesus. You, who preach that Jesus is not the mediator between God and man, only you and your so-called anointed brothers, are being persecuted in Russia for destroying families, inciting hatred of apostates, and risking the lives of Russian citizens through your ridiculous blood policy. Remember that. It's not one and the same. Paul was, in effect, accused of righteousness. You, on the other hand, are being accused of wickedness. I cannot say it enough. I do not support the persecution, but you need to face reality and understand what this is about. You need to be honest with yourselves and with your members. But honesty and truth have never been your strength. Never. Take responsibility for what your false doctrines and policies have brought on you. You were disingenuous before the ban, and you are at it again after the ban.
Well, what were some of the accusations that were brought against the early Christians? Well, writing of the Christians in that first century period in the Roman Empire, historian K.S. Latourette said this: "The accusations varied. Because they refused to participate in pagan ceremonies, the Christians were dubbed atheists. Through their abstention from much of community life, the pagan festivals, the public amusements, they were derided as haters of the human race. The fact that the memorial of Christ's death was celebrated only in the presence of believers fed the rumors that Christians regularly sacrificed an infant and consumed its blood and flesh. In addition, because the early Christians refused to practice emperor worship, they were accused of being enemies of the state." Well, does that all sound familiar? We've heard things much like that recently, haven't we?
No, not in Russia. What you have been accused of is nothing as noble as what the early Christians were accused of. You are accused of destroying families, inciting hatred, and risking the lives of Russian citizens with your blood policies. Get it now? You see, the Watchtower organization may think that witnesses in Russia are no part of the world. The Putin administration sees them as Russian citizens and values their lives more than you do, and that is a crying shame.
We know we're doing the right thing when we incur the hatred of these agents of the devil.
So now the Russian government are agents of the devil. Well, I don't run to their defense, but isn't that what you also called practically everyone who does not subscribe to Watchtower beliefs, such as other Christians you say belong to Satan's earth-wide system of false religion?
False religionists were identified as agents of the devil, whether they are aware of that fact or not.
But just as there have always been opposers of Jehovah's faithful servants, there have also been individuals like Gamaliel that Jehovah has raised up who have come to the defense of Jehovah's people. Now, some of these people do not love Jehovah's Witnesses, but for their own purposes, they're willing to defend God's people. Just take this example. Andrei Kurayev, a proto-deacon of the Russian Orthodox Church and a professor of their spiritual academy in Moscow, he's a very, very outspoken critic of Jehovah's Witnesses. But after the decision of the Russian Supreme Court, this is what he said. I argued that state agencies should not cooperate with this sect, and I do not retract my words. But to accuse them of extremism, that is not even funny. Such a decision is nothing other than idiotic, a waste to accuse pacifists of extremism. Isn't that something?
So, has Jehovah raised up an agent of the devil to defend witnesses? National leaders are also considered by you to be Satan's representatives.
Satan was the god of this world, and national leaders were his representatives.
But now Putin is an agent of the devil, but Jehovah raised up another of Satan's representatives, Chancellor Merkel, to speak for Watchtower members.
Yesterday, it was very amazing to me to see a news conference in Russia where German Chancellor Angela Merkel was on a podium with Russian President Vladimir Putin. There, Chancellor Merkel said that she asked Mr. Putin to utilize his influence to protect minority rights, as well as in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, my eyes almost fell out of my head as I saw Chancellor Merkel say that in the presence of President Putin of Russia.
You always warn your members against higher education, a means, according to you, of the corrupting influence of Satan on young minds.
The devil will, in a last-ditch effort to turn us aside from sacred service to our God, flaunt the world's material riches, its gaudy attractions, its higher education, and much more.
But now you are proud to speak of how a university professor came to the defense of witnesses.
Last week when I was in Kazakhstan, a professor came to attend our talk for the entire country. He sat right in the front row. He's written a book about Jehovah's Witnesses and is very eager always to defend us.
Man, it does appear that the agents of Satan really love your organization, don't they?
Isn't it wonderful that we have people like this who are willing to stand up for God's people?
What can I say? If you say so.
Matthew chapter 5 and verse 11. Happy are you when people reproach you and persecute you and lyingly say every sort of wicked thing against you for my sake. Rejoice and be overjoyed, since your reward is great in the heavens, for in that way they persecuted the prophets prior to you. Well, that's the attitude of true Christians.
Yes, that is the attitude of true Christians. But the words of Jesus do not apply to you in the case of the Russia ban. Pay attention, please, to what Jesus said.
Happy are you when people reproach you and persecute you and lyingly say every sort of wicked thing against you for my sake.
What you are being accused of in Russia does not constitute lies against you, and certainly not for Jesus' sake. You are being accused, let me tell you again, of destroying families. That is true. You are accused of spreading hatred. It is true. You are accused of putting Russian lives at risk with your blood policy. That is also true. And none of that is for the sake of Christ. None. So Matthew 5 verse 11 does not apply to you, nor does Revelation 12:17.
But the murderous hatred that Satan the devil has for all faithful servants of Jehovah God is still very much active in this earth. And we're not surprised by that. Do you remember what Revelation chapter 12 and verse 17 says, let's read it. Revelation 12 and verse 17. It says, "So the dragon became enraged at the woman, and went off to wage war with the remaining ones of her offspring, who observe the commandments of God and have the work of bearing witness concerning Jesus." Well, do you see the point?
Well, I see the point you are trying to make, but you have misapplied the scriptures once again. First of all, when Jesus called you to be his witnesses, you flat out said, "No, we will not be witnesses of Jesus. We will be Jehovah's Witnesses, having rejected the deity of Christ." So don't come claiming Revelation 12:17 to be speaking of you. You are not Jesus' witnesses. You also do not observe the commandments of God. You teach that the commandments are abolished as a cover for obeying the ones you choose, under the guise of not obeying the commandments, but the principles. The principles.
It says, "So the dragon became enraged at the woman, and went off to wage war with the remaining ones of her offspring, who observe the commandments of God."
But of course, the other scriptures help us when they tell us that the law was completed, that Christ was the end to the law.
Who observe the commandments of God.
Romans 7, 6 and 7. Verse 6 says, "But now we have been released from the law." So obviously, the Apostle Paul and our Lord Jesus Christ did not separate the law into two parts, the 10 Commandments and the other laws.
Who observe the commandments of God.
But now we have been released from the law. Well, I believe we're under the principles of the 10 Commandments.
What would you say if the appeal court rules that the law to ban witnesses in Russia is abolished, but the principle remains? Then and only then might you see the folly in the nonsense being spewed by Jeffrey Jackson on behalf of the Watchtower Society. It would be fun to see how you handle that, but it will not happen. For not even in the now established crazy Russian judiciary will you ever hear something so absurd. Absurdities like those are reserved for the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society.
May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.